asset strategy manager in Wales and West Utilities, and I'm one of the co-leads alongside Gary on the development of the whole system CBA, and now the sort of promotion and getting it out there and getting it used.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So good afternoon, everybody. As Ian says, my name's Gary Dolphin. I work within the economics assessment team, within network development, within National Grid ESO. That's a team that does a lot of cost benefit analyses. So I'm very happy to be the co-lead on this particular work stream.
Excellent. So what we're going to cover today, we've put a few sessions in. Basically, we've built a whole system CBA, but we've really struggled to get people using it. So we've engaged quite widely. A fair bit of the feedback really is quite daunting. And you'd almost expect that with a whole system CBA, because it's trying to consider lots of costs, lots of benefits, lots of future scenarios, etc. So yeah, we put these sessions in really as it's split into two halves. Firstly, we'll have an overview of the whole system CBA and potential use cases and a bit of a high-level description of the tool. And then the second half of the session, which Gary will run, we'll walk through a worked example to try and bring it to life to people a bit. Hoping for a very interactive session. Welcome any questions. If you can use your hands or use the chat, that would be appreciated. And we're seeing this as one of the first of these sorts of sessions. And you know, if people are not using this because they need a little bit more training, a little bit more support, we're very happy to put on future sessions to maybe get a little bit more into the real detail of that. So apologies for the quite wordy slide, but this were the sort of things we set out when we built the whole system CBA, just to bring some context and to focus the mind on what we were trying to deliver. So first one, a whole system CBA should evaluate options and help to achieve net zero. This includes addressing the wider societal impacts of different options. So we built a tool very much looking at the wider societal impacts, and hopefully you'll see that in a bit. Consumer impact should be the heart of decision making. So the way we've structured the whole system CBA, it's very transparent on who pays what, if you like, and who benefits with what. So we tried to keep the tool as flexible as we can in terms of outputs, and that, you know, like I say, shows who's benefiting, who's paying, and the balance of all that. Key stakeholders should support it. BEIS, Ofgem, the energy networks. It's been developed with a lot of support under Open Networks and Workstream 4. Joe Grosh and the team in Ofgem have been very supportive and have helped review as we go. So we got a fair bit of buy-in to the tool. The whole system CBA should be used to articulate the benefits that the energy industry delivers. So like I said earlier, we tried to capture a lot of costs and a lot of benefits and a real view of the impact of decisions, etc. within the tool. We'll help deliver a secure network at optimal value for money for consumers, considering the needs of both present and future consumers. So you'll see when I walk through the use cases in a minute. There's some decisions we wanted the tool to support, and basically it outputs today's costs and long-term costs. So we're considering both present and future. Support objective, technology neutral and transparent decision making. So it would enable cost and value to be drawn out explicit to all to see. But then the next bullet point, the CBA is only one element of the decision-making toolkit. So we've tried to monetize and value in a consistent way anything we possibly can. But as in any investment decision, there are factors sometimes you can't monetize and need to be considered as well. So we tried to make sure the tool could not just deal with the monetized stuff, but help you consider other factors that may play into your decision making. And then supporting regulatory frameworks that allow the sharing of surplus value. So some of you may be aware of the CAM methodology, which is basically where money can be traded between companies if there's a better solution than the original one that went into business plans that was funded. So as I say, Joe Grosh and the team of Ofgem have been very supportive of this, and they're promoting the sort of use of the whole system CBA and CAM related decisions. So there's a bit of background of what we were trying to do. When should the whole system CBA be used? Where there are whole system interactions or potential for it. So we've all got our own CBAs. Ofgem released a set of them that we're required to populate for business plans. Quite a lot of that is like asset health, etc. related decisions, where there isn't this sort of whole whole system approach, whereas some other things, you know, there are options across sectors, etc. So that's where you'd use a whole system CBA rather than you know, the company specific CBAs. Should use the CBA where it can drive you to make a different decision. And the CBA needs to carry out in good faith, and that is always a natural bias, inevitably with CBA. What we try to do with the tool is build as much information and data in there as we possibly can to potentially remove some of that bias. But it's going to be quite a challenge, this, particularly when you look across energy companies and, you know, we're potentially trading money between gas and electric and gas. It's very difficult to stay neutral in sort of decision making. So we're very keen to try and avoid that natural bias. And is a whole system CBA reasonable? So CBA is complex and it's difficult to estimate costs and benefits. And this is probably one of the biggest bits of feedback we've had about the tool so far, is the tool can come up with a lot of stuff, but, you know, getting things out like network costs, network investment options, you know, there lies the challenge there with limited numbers of people in the companies who can provide that sort of thing. So that's one of the big feedbacks we've had so far. So what we're saying on there, you know, this is quite complex. There's a lot of data there. So pause and think before you use the whole system CBA. And data will be a challenge, as you'll see as we go through. We built it. We sort of started with what should be the use cases we could potentially use the whole system CBA for. So I won't go through in detail this slide, but the first one here, asset interventions. We use the example of a gas pipe feeding the town just reaching the end of asset life. You know, is the right thing to put a new gas pipe in, or actually could we consider electrifying and you know, all things in between? So we thought one use case there would be sort of asset intervention stuff. Investment planning, so we spend a lot of money on reinforcing both the gas and electricity networks for future capacity. This is just looking at where you best spend your money to make sure that capacity was available. Third one down, embedded generation. So example here, farmer wants to build a biogas plant on agricultural waste, and this is you know, something we get all the time. Should it be best generate electricity, or should it be putting the biogas into the gas network? So this tool should certainly help with that sort of decision. Local authority planning, so a huge thing at the moment. Local authority energy planning, the networks are trying to support. This was seen as a, you know, a key use case for this tool, really, where it helps evaluate different options for energy in towns and cities and local authorities, and help make an informed decision based on cost and benefit. And then down the bottom, strategic planning. So we're probably thinking a little bit big here, but, you know, this tool would help you assess at a very high level the best way for the UK to meet this net zero target. So again, evaluates the costs and benefits and tries to look at all costs. You know, we were hopeful that this tool could help inform those sort of decisions as well. At the first stage of the analysis, so a user should define a use case, its strategies. So strategies mean sorts of options, the stakeholders involved, the scenarios. So what the model tries to do, it lets you put different strategies in, so different options, but then it also considers that in a range of scenarios. So as an example, the scenarios could be the FES, the future energy scenarios. So what it tries to do is say, right, this option might seem right in this case, but actually looking at possible future scenarios that would bring that into question. So it tries to do that. So it's very important you describe the use case up front, detailing the investment aim, and you understand, you know, carbon reduction, carbon emissions, etc. So you understand what your option costs you and what it impacts on carbon. The point at which inputs are treated as exogenous and endogenous, so basically variables that impact and variables that are impacted. How many strategies they will consider, so you have to know your options up front. We have got something in the tool that allows you to put many options in and discount them before you take them to full CBA. But you know, at least you can see they've been considered, because I would say there is a lot of data involved in this. So, you know, if you can remove options up front as considered but not viable, that's a pretty good plan for using this tool. Scenarios, again, like I say, we use the FES in examples we've used, but the tool can accommodate up to 5 future scenarios. So it has a reference one, and it looks at the potential scenarios and helps you decide whether your option, you know, is robust in different future energy scenarios. the relevant set of stakeholders, regulated or non-regulated. So in the tool, it allows you to apply costs and benefits to a range of different stakeholders. So you can understand the impact on network companies, but you can understand the impact on consumers, consumer bills, and any other stakeholders, generators, or any others. So it's quite flexible in terms of that. The reference year for discounting and the reference year for price base, so proper CBA terms then, but yeah, we need to decide a reference year. And then inputs, excuse me, inputs to the CBA then, and this is where any users of the tool need to sit there up front and get their head around all of this. So for the regulated networks, CapEx, OpEx, avoided cost, monetized risk or NAMs, which is something we know and love in the industry, which is looking at the health of assets, incentives and penalties, and ability for the user to define more subcategories. So it's understanding all the costs of the networks, not just upfront CapEx and OpEx, but also avoided costs, and like I say, any incentivization and penalties that are part of the regulatory framework. And for non-regulated stakeholders, costs and benefits are sort of user defined, so that they can be anything there. For those more techie on here, the model allows you to use different levels of WACC, so weighted average cost of capital, depending on the stakeholder, etc. So it's pretty flexible in what you can do in considering different stakeholders. And then coming down, you need to consider the societal benefits. So we've listed a few there. So safety, environmental, transport disruption. I won't run through them all, but safety and gas is a big thing. There's been some awful explosions over the last week, in fact. So it's a big consideration in our decision making. The environmental stuff, CO2 emissions, the user has to decide the volume of the tool itself, monetizes that, so supports with that. Where the tool has factors in there like carbon costs, etc., there are links in there that take you to the source of that data. So we're trying to keep the tool as up to date and as refreshed as possible. But any user can go in there, click on links either through the user guide or the tool, and understand where the sort of assumptions that sit behind things like carbon cost are. So hopefully it's very transparent in that space. And then things like pick one here, disruption. So we've always also tried to consider things like, if we are going to go down this route, if you're going to electrify Bristol, you're going to pretty much have to dig up every street in Bristol. So not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but let's make sure things like that are considered in a whole system CBA. Tool also takes into account the distributional impact of costs and benefits between stakeholders and customers. So as you'd expect with a tool like this, there are winners and losers. There's people who benefit, people who don't. What the tool tries to do is just take an unbiased view of the world and just export, this is what it's costing these stakeholders and this is what it's benefiting these stakeholders. So, it should give you enough information on the output to make informed decisions on and understand the impact of that on various stakeholders and consumers. An analysis of monetized impacts on a common basis, so discounting and price base. For those again who are familiar with CBA, we've used a Spatman approach for discounting, which is generally well accepted in our industry. The tool allows for a dynamic discounted reference year, so it's quite flexible there, and it also allows for a dynamic price-based reporting year. So we try to build as much flexibility into the tool as we can. And then the list of reported metrics that the tool does. So as expected, it would do net cost benefit impact. So that's an export of the tool. But then it can break down that net impact in cost of benefits and the societal and customer impacts and benefits. And it's listed a few there like carbon, volume, etc. So we've also got down the bottom as well. We tried to build into the tool sort of least worst regrets and tipping point functionality. So take the tipping point one, right? We're making a decision on this. It says to do this, but actually, if these factors were, there was a potential for error on some of the things we put into the model, right? At what point does that error have to be big enough for you to make a different decision? So again, hopefully the tool, helps the user then in understanding uncertainty. this is the high level tool structure. This will probably come more to life when Gary does the demonstration now. So I probably won't go into that too much because it won't be too much. We won't mean too much to you looking at that on the screen. But when Gary pulls the model up and walks through it, you'll see what that sort of means. So yeah, apologies, I talked a fair bit there, a lot of bullet points, etc. But just trying to give you a bit of background to the tool, what we've built it for, the things we're considering, and yeah, hopefully a nice segue into now Gary walking you through the actual tool itself and showing you the potential for it. But I'm conscious I talked a lot. Was there any questions, or I'm not sure I can see hands or chat on my screen? Perfect. Okay, but please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go. But Gary, if I can hand over to you at that point.
Yeah. Cheers, Ian. Thanks for that run through what can be done with the tool. So what I'll do is I'll just talk a little bit about the tool, and then we can go in and actually demo it. So let me share my screen. Before I show you the tool, let me go back to the slides and let's just go through this one. Can you see the PowerPoint deck again now?
Yes, Gary.
I can go. Yes.
Cool. Okay. So this slide is just trying to before we dive into the slide, just to try a bit of context and structure around how the tool is actually structured in Excel. So you can see I've got 7 lovely coloured blocks on the left-hand side, and this represents the kind of key high-level structure of the tabs within the model. And we have had some feedback saying that when you first open up the tool, people find it's a bit daunting. There are dozens of tabs, but for me, the key thing is to, just to spend a little bit of time looking at the tool and understand a little bit about why it's been structured the way it is. So you'll see that the first set of tabs are coloured green and they're labelled user controls. And within that, there's a couple of tabs. One's called controls, one's called use case description. And these are really important tabs within the tool itself. So within them, you can set the scenarios that Ian has already talked about. You can set your strategies, i.e. how you're going to potentially solve this issue that you've got, the kind of reason why you're doing this CBA. You can set what stakeholders you're going to include within it, and then you can also set some of the key kind of economic metrics, like what type of depreciation you want to set, and also there's some other functionality in there where you can update charts. So these tabs, which are coloured green, as I've kind of highlighted on the very right-hand side, these require user input. They're very important, and these need to be populated correctly. The second bunch of tabs, these are coloured blue, and once again, these are very important. The user does need to put the relevant data in these. So these are labelled strategies, and this is where the user can put in the individual strategies that they want to use. And so you can have up to 7 of those. And you can put supporting material in there as well, as I'll show you. So you can keep all the information for a particular CBA within the one spreadsheet. And so this is where you're going to put all your costs, and costs are always put in as a negative number. Benefits, not surprisingly, then are put in as positives. And the individual needs to populate these numbers for each strategy and scenario. The next section in purple is called strategy summary, and as the name suggests, this is really just taking the information you've already putting in and summarizing this, so it kind of aggregates up the number and it just shows you how the numbers kind of total up. So there's no need for the user to input on these sheets. The next set in grey are labelled outputs, and as the name suggests, this is where you see the output data. It's very dominated by charts, and so it's presenting the NPVs, the net present values. It's presenting them in terms of both absolute and relative NPVs, and it does this for all the scenarios. And it also includes stuff such as payback period, tipping point analysis, etc., etc., etc. After that, then there's a few tabs which you may or may not be interested in. So there's one in orange. There's a set and labeled qualitative inputs, and as the name suggests, this is where people can put in kind of non-monetized impact within the CBA. So there's lots of potential areas where it's very difficult to quantify in terms of money. So these tabs enable people to try and capture some of this within the whole system CBA in a number of different formats. And so depending on how you want to undertake your CBA, you may want to put some additional material in there. The tabs after that, the ones in yellow, these are inputs, but they're not inputs that the typical user is going to have to refer to. This is much more the kind of underlying fixed and time series inputs, which of course are very important to the tool, but hopefully these will not have to be updated on a regular basis by the kind of casual user, for want of a better phrase. So these are your discount rates, your kind of societal and customer impacts and CO2 prices, etc. So they're sitting there in the background, and the average user is not going to have to touch those. The final set of tabs in a kind of dark grey, they're not actually visible. They're hidden away by the developer of the tool, and these are really just showing. These are tabs that hold some of the workings of the spreadsheet. There's a number of VBA buttons within the tool, so when you click on these, there's a lot of things going on in the background, but they are not things that the user has to look at, and so these can be hidden away. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea on the structure. And then I thought maybe before we dive into the tool, just to get your eye in a little bit, let's step back a bit and think just about what we want to do with the tool at a very, very high level. So this is my attempt at trying to put the whole system CBA onto a single slide. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got a number of brightly coloured columns, and these represent the scenarios that an individual might want to use within the CBA. And so because I work at National Grid, not surprisingly, I've kind of put in a number of the future energy scenarios. So I've got leading the way in there in green, consumer transformation and system transformation in blue. And then, of course, you could have other scenarios in there as well. It's entirely your choice. Then cutting across that, I've got a number of horizontal arrows, and these are the strategies that you need to populate the tool with. So these are the various options that you're considering doing. And so I've just come up with some theoretical ones here. And so I've said, well, one option that we might consider is developing a flexibility solution. Another one might be going for traditional kind of network reinforcement. And then I've got more of a kind of whole systems solution. Maybe we could look at developing a hydrogen network. And then the final one is a classic kind of counterfactual, and that is just do nothing, and so leave the situation as it currently is. Once we've put in all that data, then we can move on to the central box, and this is where we can do all the kind of essential CBA calcs, your classic costs and benefits, your capex and your opex, but there's other things we can put in there as well: safety, environmental, visual amenity, etc., etc. There's lots and lots of options, and it's only really limited by what kind of data you can get to populate the tool with. Some of it might be quantitative, some of it might be qualitative, but there's lots that you can do with this tool. You can include risk analyses, etc., etc. You click the button, the tool does the depreciation all for you. It's all automatic, and then it will kind of deposit the results in the output tabs. And as we've said, it comes up with the classic things such as net present value. It can also do a least worst regret if you've got multiple scenarios in there. It can do sensitivity analyses, and of course there's a tipping point analysis. So maybe that was of some use. We'll find out. But that's just trying to give you a very, very high level idea of what the tool does. So without further ado, let me bring up the tool to the screen, and we can look through it in a bit more detail. So hopefully now you can see the spreadsheet, and I'm going to try and have it at a reasonable size so that hopefully you can read maybe some of the text. And so you can see along the bottom, on the bottom ribbon, you can see some of the colors that I mentioned before. So before the first set of tabs, the ones in green, the user control section, there's an initial tab, and this one is labeled guidance. So as the name suggests, this is just giving the kind of the first user, the first person the first time a user goes into the tool, just a little bit of a high level guidance on how to use the tool. It's quite short, but it's useful to look at. And so we'll quickly go through that. And so I'll just pull out some of the things that it's saying within here. And the first thing to note is it states that the user should populate only the light yellow cells only. So if you're seeing a light yellow cell, this is something that the user can put data into or change a setting, and that will be captured by the tool and will alter the results. If you're starting to change numbers in other cells, then that could have dire consequences on the results. So you really do need to just focus on putting data within the light yellow cells, and I'll show you that as we get into the tool. It reinforces that if you're talking about costs, you need to put those in as negative values, and if you're talking about benefits, which could be avoided costs, then you need to put those numbers in as positive values. It then talks about you can set a common base year, etc., and a discounting year. So that's very flexible within the tool, and it's quite interesting to change those and see the impact on the results, and we'll come on to that. And then it talks about talking around strategies that you can put within the tool. And then if I move on down, it describes again the core kind of 7 sections that I've talked about already within the tool, just to remind you what the relevant color coding represents within the model. Then beneath that, there's a quick description of what the different colors of cells you'll see within the model. So already we've mentioned that a light yellow cell like this one is for the user to populate, put information in. If it's a dark gray cell, then there's a formula or a calculation going on in there. The light blue ones are where when you hit one of the buttons within the tool, then VBA will be going on in the background and it will populate the data within there. The kind of salmon color here, this light salmon color, that just provides a category information. So a description of what those cells represent, and then the final one in green, that's purely represents a time frame. So when there's a time series, be it years, etc., any of those will be coloured in green just for ease of visualization. So without further ado, let's dive into some of the more useful, powerful worksheets within the tool. And the first one then is under the user control section, is labeled controls. And let's go into this one in a fair bit of detail, because there's some really important stuff going on in here. So along the top then, you'll see there's 3 buttons. So these, when you hit on them, they fire off some VBA going on in the background. And the first one is labeled remove unused tabs and rows. And this is a really great feature that the developers, Beringa, have built into the tool. Because one of the things we want with a tool like this is to have as much flexibility within it as possible. So as Ian's already mentioned, you can put in 5 scenarios if you want to, and you can put in up to 7 strategies. And so that's great, and that enables you to do a very broad brush CBA. The downside of that is, of course, potentially you end up with 5 times 7, so that's 35 sets of charts or many rows of data within the tool. And if you're only interested in a couple of scenarios, or as we're going to do today, we're only going to look at one scenario just purely for illustrative purposes, you don't really want to see all those hundreds or potentially thousands of rows of empty cells sitting there, or lots of empty charts. So by hitting this button here, once you've set how many scenarios and strategies you want, you click on this button and it rapidly gets rid of those unwanted cells and charts within the tool, and that's really useful. The second button lets you pick what type of depreciation. It activates the depreciation within the tool. So this button is available on this tab and on other tabs, and so it's important to click this button if you've changed. So you want to look at a different type of depreciation. There's a couple that you can run within the tool, or if you've changed any of the numbers, then you want to hit this button to make sure that the depreciation caps are up to date. The final button along the top is to update the chart. So once you've populated all your costs and benefits in some of the later tabs, which I'm going to go on to, you want to update, you want to click this button to make sure that all the charts in the output section are up to date. So if we now go back to the left-hand side of this, we can start looking at some of the data that the user can pick. So the first one in yellow, so these are the cells we can change. You can see is depreciation method, and so you can just click on in traditional fashion the drop-down list, and you can pick what type of depreciation one. Me coming from the ESO, then I very much know and love the straight line depreciation method, but the model's also got the sum of year digits depreciation methodology built in as well if you want to do a more aggressive depreciation within your CBA. Beneath that, then we come on to picking the reference years, and so you can see you can set your net present value kind of time horizon, and at the moment this is just set to 15, so not surprisingly that means that the benefits are being calculated out to 2037, but you can put whatever number you want within there. So if you put in 30 years, then it comes all the way out to 2052. Then beneath that, you can set your discounting year. So within this, it's a little bit out of date. The model we've got here, the example, it's set at 2019-20, and so that the model captures that as 2020. And then similarly beneath that, you can capture your price base reference year. You can put your inputs year, and then you can also select what the output price base reference year is as well. Then beneath that, we come on to some of the really important things that you need to set within the model, and this is selecting which scenarios you want to put in. So as we've already mentioned, you can put in up to 5 scenarios. Here within this model, purely for illustrative purposes, we're going to limit the run through to 1 scenario, and so we've put in leading the way, but you could put in another 4 on top of that. And then beneath that, you need to pick, if you are going to put in more scenarios, you need to pick which one of those is going to be your reference scenario, so that when we get to the output side, you can compare all the scenarios to the reference case, and you can see what the delta is between those. Similarly, then, you need to pick your strategies. So these are your options of how you're going to kind of solve a particular problem that you've got. And within this, we've only selected 2. You could have up to 7. And so we've named them counterfactual. So this might be your kind of do nothing case. And then we've labeled one as integrated. So this might be some kind of integrated whole system solution that you're looking at to solve an issue that you have on a network, for example. Once again, you need to pick which one you're going to have as your kind of reference strategy. And not surprisingly, in this case, we've picked the counterfactual as the reference strategy. Going further down, then, you can see that the tool is already pre-populated with a whole bunch of regulated stakeholders, as one would expect. So if you're doing a whole system CBA, maybe looking at both the electricity and the gas side, you would expect to be picking some of these particular ones within your scenario, within your CBA, and so these have been pre-populated for ease of use. And you can see you've got columns for the weighted average cost of capital, the capitalization rate, and the depreciation period as well, so you can put data in there. But you don't, of course, just have to put in regulated stakeholders. You can put in non-regulated stakeholders. So within here, we've added a category for generators. and so you can put in data for those as well. And then a really powerful part of the tool is you can add in additional cost and benefit categories. So what we've done here is we've added in for the ESO, we've got categories for boundary costs and system costs. So these are two areas that I know and love. So when we're doing our CBAs within National Grid ESO, obviously we're very keen to look at the cost of any potential reinforcement on constraint costs on the system. So we would be looking at boundary costs, and also there's the other impact that the potential reinforcements or a generator connecting to a system might have on, say, system operability. So we can, by adding in these additional input categories, we could capture things like that. And of course, we've also got generation costs being captured for the non-regulated stakeholders. But if you want to add even more additional user-defined societal impact categories, use a whole bunch of light yellow cells, you could put additional information in here. So really, with a tool like this, the limit is only what data you can get to populate the tool. So there's an awful lot of flexibility in here. You could end up, if you wanted to, with a CBA that's got many, many dozens of kind of line items feeding in, be they, you know, CapEx costs, CO2 costs, other things that you can find data for. If you can quantify it, then this tool will enable you to create a CBA and do an analysis on those. So I think that's all I wanted to say on that particular tab. Let me move on to the next one, which is labeled use case description. This one is much more of a one for the individual to populate if they so desire. So this is an opportunity to kind of focus your mind on just exactly what you want to include within your inputs that you're feeding into the model. So you can see, you can capture what that particular driver is going to be, whether it's on endogenous or exogenous, where you got the data from, and then your kind of justification for including it or maybe not including it. So I think this is a good feature because by having this in here, you can capture as much information as possible within a single spreadsheet rather having additional supporting information lying around. So from a kind of quality assurance point of view, having this tab in there can be a useful addition to the tool. Let's move on then to the next set of tabs, and that is the ones in blue, and these are labeled the kind of strategies section. And so let's click on the first one, which is STR1 CB inputs. So these are the CBA inputs that we're going to put in for strategy number 1. So let's click on this one. So at the top of this particular tab then, you can see there's a couple of blue buttons as well. So these are going to fire off VBA code. The first one is labeled clear input data. So clearly then, if you click on that button, it will wipe out any input data that you've already put in. So you end up with a kind of blank sheet to start from at the very beginning. So I'm not going to hit that one. And then once again, there's the apply depreciation button. So once you've put in all your costs, etc., it'll do the depreciation calcs. So let's go down this particular tab, this worksheet, sorry, in some detail. So at the top, we've got the stakeholders that we've assigned to this particular strategy. So you can see then in this one, you could have up to a maximum of 6 stakeholders, but we have populated it with 5. And so we've got 3 of the electricity transmission owners in there. We've got the National Grid ESO in there as the system operator. And then we've got, as the 5th stakeholder, we've got generators in there as a non-regulated participant type. By putting this data into these yellow cells, then it pre-populates these more kind of the detailed input section lower down in the tool. And so Here we are then for scenario 1. We're only considering one scenario, and this is our leading waste scenario, which is going to be our reference scenario. It's now giving us the opportunity to put in the relevant cost data for each of the stakeholders that we selected up here. So the first one, not surprisingly, is National Grid Electricity Transmission. And so once again in yellow then, it's enabling us to put in the CapEx and the OpEx data that we want to put in. And so you can see then here are the yellow cells that we can populate for whichever years we are interested in. So in green then it just gives you the individual years along the top. And you can see we've populated the data all the way out to 2050. And so you put that data into the yellow cells, these ones here. And then once you hit the calc button, the tool will pre-populate these cells here, and it'll give you the depreciated numbers. So you can do that for all of the stakeholders that you want to select. So as you probably remember, we've put in 5 stakeholders here, and you can see we've got for National Grid ESO, because we selected the type of data that we wanted to include on the previous tab, it's now brought that through, and so we can now enter in the system costs and the boundary costs for that particular strategy that we're considering. So you can see that's been populated in these cells over here. So that shows the power of the tool. As long as you know what kind of line items you want to put in, you can set those within the control tabs, and the tool will automatically calculate the relevant design for the input tabs to enable you to put that data in. And so similarly on the generator side, you can see there's a line item for generation costs, and so you can put in that relevant data in here as well. So that gives you a quick idea of the items that you can put in for the what we've labelled as the stakeholder impacts. But beneath this section, you'll see there's additional impacts you can put in. So we've got societal impacts. Once again, this is only focusing on scenario 1, leading the way, because we've only selected one particular scenario. And so you can see there's a whole bunch of categories that you can put in here. So we've got safety. So you could, if you've got data that quantifies, potential impact of mortality or injuries, etc., you can capture the data in here. There's a lot of categories for CO2 emissions. You can capture that data, and we've put some of that within the model here. You can see we've got some CO2 data that's been put in terms of tons of CO2 equivalent, and then the model will convert that into a pounds and millions figure. But there's lots of other things you could put in as well. So you can capture cost for losses, other greenhouse gas emissions such as sulfur hexafluoride and methane or NOx, etc., oil leakage. Really, as I've said countless times before, if you can get the data for it, then the model can accommodate that within the flexibility that's been built in. And you can put in costings for transport as well, potential disruptions, heat, and other, user-defined impacts. So if you can think of something, you can label it in here, and the tool will capture it, and then you can simply populate your annual figures to the right-hand side of it over here. Final set of impact section is for customers. Now, I'm no expert in this one, but I know from a distribution network point of view, there's lots of potential data you could put in here. And so the tool enables you to capture that within here. I'm not going to try and talk about something that I don't really understand, but you can see there's already categories for customer interruptions, customer minutes lost, avoided complaints, and the various categories for these GSOPs, which is an acronym. I can never remember what it stands for, but you get the point. There's lots of different line items in here that if you've got the data for, from a distribution network point of view, you can put that data in here. And it just keeps on going. So here's all the ones for gas distribution customers. Etc., etc., etc. So I can understand why people are daunted by when they look at this the tool initially, because here we are, we're down at the row, we're nearly 880, and it keeps on coming. And so if you added multiple more and more potential options, you would have even more rows. But the thing to remember is you don't have to use all of this. You can just put in the rows, use the data that you've got, populate the tool, and the rest of it will stay empty. So there's no problem with that. So the tool can be as focused or as broad as you want to make it. So after that tab, which is the first kind of strategy 1 CBA input tab, you've got one labeled strategy 1 user workings. This tab is purely for the individual to decide if they want to put any data within it. This is purely almost like a kind of when you're at school and you used to have to show your workings for an exam. You only have to put information in this if you so desire to. So you might want to show how you've calculated particular numbers, and you could do those calcs in here. So it just means that you could keep the numbers within the tool and you don't have to capture it within a separate spreadsheet. So once again, that's good from a QA point of view. But these, if you want to, you can leave these tabs completely empty. The tool will still run perfectly fine without any data being put in here. Because we've got 2 strategies for this tool, you can see there's an identical strategy 2 CBA tab, which was exactly the same as the one I just walked through. But of course, this then is for the second strategy that we've got. Then after that, to support that, once again, there's a tab whereby you can capture any supporting data that you want to put in. And then after that, once you've populated those ones for however many strategies that you've got, you've done all the hard work, and it's the tool that will do the kind of heavy lifting after that point. From this point on, we're now into the purple tabs. So these are the strategy summary section. And the first one will just be a summary of all the data that you've put in for your first strategy. And so within this one, so this is our counterfactual strategy, our reference strategy. All the tool is doing here is picking up all the data that you've put in your previous tabs, and it's aggregating it up for your stakeholders. And then it's got it via stakeholder impact, societal impact, and customer impact. So it captures all that data, and it's got it in terms of both discounted and undiscounted. So there's nothing that the user has to do in here. You can see all the cells are grayed out. So this is the spreadsheet calculating all of these summary numbers. It just gives you an easy kind of look at the data once it's been aggregated up, and you can see also the impact of the discounting on the various elements of the data broken down by your stakeholders, societal and customer elements. So there'll be one of these purple tabs for all the strategy that you've got. So we've only got 2. So there's 2 tabs which look very similar. So this is the strategy 2 summary tab. So this is for our integrated strategy. And then after that point, we're into the light grey output section. And so this is where we can start seeing some of the high level results. So let me quickly walk you through some of these. And not surprisingly then, the results are very heavily chart based. And so on this particular tab, we've got 3 charts. So let's start on the one on the left. And if I zoom in a bit, You can see it's showing the absolute net present value for the calcs that have been done, and it's showing it for the counterfactual and for the integrated. So you can see on this one, the costs for the integrated are significantly lower than for the counterfactual. But let's not get hung up on the numbers here. It's really just to show you how the results will be shown graphically within the tool. So this is showing it in terms of absolute NPV. This chart is showing it the absolute NPV broken down by stakeholders, societal and customer impacts across all the strategies. And then the final chart here is showing the CO2 emissions. And you can see then it's a very clear message coming across from this. So that, of course, is the quantitative output, but it also does a summary of some qualitative impact, and I'll come on to that because that is actually populated from some of the later tabs. So that is showing the results for all the strategies under the reference scenario. We can then move on to the next tab for the results, and this one is showing the results relative to the reference strategy under the reference scenario. So let me get your head around that one. So in this one then, we're comparing all the results in the reference strategy under the reference scenario, sorry, relative to the reference strategy. So our reference strategy is the counterfactual. So you can see here then, not surprisingly, if we're using that as our reference point, there's a 0 number for the counterfactual, and then it's just showing you the integrated value relative to that. And so you can see we see a positive number for the integrated solution within the reference scenario. Similarly, this chart is showing it relative to the reference strategy, but this is broken down by our various stakeholders. And then similarly, this is showing the impact on CO2 costs relative to the reference strategy, i.e. the counterfactual. And then I guess a point to note is because we're only showing one scenario, the next set of charts aren't going to look that different. But if we were considering, say, 5 strategies, then you would have 5 times as many bars coming up here. You'd have 5 times 2 strategies, so you'd have 10 bars in this chart, 10 bars in this chart, etc., etc. And so quite quickly, if you're considering 5 strategies and 5 scenarios, you could end up with some quite busy charts here with potentially 25 bars in each one of these. So a lot of data to be visualized there, but once again, if you are considering that number of options, then the tool is quite powerful and able to quickly produce these summary charts based on whatever data you have put in. The final outputs tab is a similar kind of thing. So if you were considering multiple scenarios, this would have a lot more data on it, and this would be showing you the results of all of these scenarios relative to the reference strategy. So that once again would be able to, you'd be able to see the delta in the results relative to the reference strategy across all of the scenarios. So that could be a useful thing to look at. But of course, sometimes you might not want to just look at the kind of visual charts. You might want to look at output data. So the next tab along is an output tab, an output table tab, and this will include all the data from the charts. And so that might be useful if you want to integrate and look at the actual numbers behind it. And then we get into some of the more additional kind of functionality, the way you can interrogate the results. So you can work out what the kind of payback period is. So when does it take before a particular option becomes kind of profitable? So you can do that. You can also, it'll calculate your worst regret across the options. And then the next tab is the tipping point analysis. that we tend to do sometimes with CBAs, so you can work out, well, at what point would the results be changed? What would you have to change a particular value to actually change the outcome of the CBA? And then the final tab within the results section, you can do a distributional analysis. So if you want to change, to kind of pass through some of the costs to customers, you can do that within this section. So you can set your sharing factor across your stakeholders. Here they've all been set to 50%. And then the tool will go away and calculate what impact that would have on the results. So here we've got a chart showing the overall impact pre-sharing factor, and then it shows you the results of the overall impact post-sharing factor. So that might be some functionality that could also prove useful. So that's looking at the kind of the quantitative hard data side of the tool, but there's other functionality within there as well. So the next section is the orange tabs. So these are the qualitative inputs. And the first tab in here is labeled the long list of strategies. So this enables you to capture, once again, in one place, all of the potential strategies that you might want to consider. And so you could list them all out in here, and then you can put within this column HIJ, you can decide, well, am I actually going to include this particular strategy within this CBA? And then you can capture the reasons why you may have discounted that one at this point. And I think this, once again, is a useful tab to have if you are coming up with many different potential strategies and you want to have somewhere where you can capture, for QA purposes, maybe why you've discounted some of those options before incorporating them into the kind of detailed CBA. Next tab along then is to enable you to do some sort of analysis around qualitative impacts. And so we've only put in a very simple set of data here. So we've come up with a number of categories of qualitative impact. So we've got environmental, social and local, and then a number of security supplying ones in there. And you can see then the tool as it's currently configured. We've got, for the counterfactual case, we've put all of these as amber. And in the integrated one, we've put them all as green. A very simple example, but of course, you could build this as complicated and sophisticated as you want. And you can capture the data in here, and then on the outputs tabs, you can look at the quantitative numbers, but also the qualitative analysis as well. So you'll get that broader picture of what the particular strategies you're considering, how they kind of mesh together, both on the quantitative and the qualitative side. Another useful tab that might come in handy is that they've put in a kind of risk register. So if there are any particular risks that need to be captured, you can put them in here, see how they apply to the relevant strategy, and then you could score those in terms of the impact and the likelihood. And then you can also capture any kind of mitigation or controls that you want to include within there. So that might also be another important kind of qualitative element that you want to capture within CBA. Next tab along is kind of business plan cost categories. And so this is just providing a long list of some of the cost categories captured within Rio. And so this might be a useful kind of aid memoir if there are any particular line items that you want to capture within your CBA. You can have a look at this and you can see there might be some elements in here that you think, oh yeah, that's something that I do need to consider within the whole system CBA. After that then, it's really areas that you don't really need to touch. So we're moving into the yellow tabs. So these are your input sections. So you've got your fixed inputs and you don't need to touch any of these. So these are your discounting rates. A lot of this will be taken from the HM's Green Book, but there's a lot of other data that's been captured in here. Yes, it will have to be updated over time, but it's not something that the average user is going to have to look at on a regular basis. Similarly, the time series tabs, there's lots of information captured in here on, say, traded CO2 prices. and you can see it's been captured from the Green Book. It provides links to where the data's come from. But as I say, not necessary for the average user to dive into this. And then similarly, there's a useful tab labeled Input Depository, which tells you where some of that data has come from. So that if you're thinking the data is getting a little bit out of date, you can go into here and hopefully get hold of the relevant data when you click on some of these links, and you can update the tool. The final set of tabs are all hidden, and I'm not going to show you those because there's no point. A lot of them will be blank tabs, i.e. there'd be additional tabs sitting there if you were doing up to 7 strategies or 5 scenarios. So there's, you know, over 30 tabs sitting there hidden at the moment, and you just don't want to have those sitting there on your bottom ribbon of worksheets if you're not going to use any of those. So quite rightly those are hidden away at the moment. So I've probably rambled on quite a bit there about the tool. Really, I've kind of just scratched the surface there. We toyed with the idea of putting a more detailed kind of granular example in, and we may well still do that depending on the feedback we get from today's session. But the example we put in there here today is a very simple one, but hopefully it still gives you a flavour for what you can do within this tool. Clearly, it is quite powerful, and you could have, as I say, many different options within this tool running across a lot of scenarios with many line items in. So you could see potentially you could have hundreds, if not thousands, of line items of data in here, and that would be an extremely complex CBA. But it also copes with a much more simple CBA. If you've only got a couple of pieces of data that you want to put in, then the tool will work just as well with that. And I guess that kind of leads me on to one of my final observations on this tool is the tool itself might be a little daunting to some people, but really I think that for me one of the key things is actually getting hold of some of the data to kind of populate the tool. I think that can be challenging at the moment, and that's why at the moment I think thinking about the tool, further discussions and engagement with stakeholders is going to be much more around how do we get people to use the tool in its current state, rather than thinking about, well, let's develop additional functionality within the tool, because that's not the kind of feedback we're getting at the moment. It's much more a case of how can I use this tool, where can I get the data from to start being able to do those kind of whole system CBAs. So I'm going to shut up at that point, and I will do my very best to answer any questions that anybody might have at this point with regard to the whole system CBA and the kind of high level demo that I've given of the tool. Stunned silence.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I think we've covered a fair bit there in there, so I'm not surprised there's stunned silence. I mean, the whole point of these sessions really is to raise a bit of an awareness and to give people an intro to the tool. What we're really keen is we get people out there using it, and get the feedback via that route. So if there is any interest,
yeah, we've got us. I think we've got a hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much for that run through. I think it's really interesting. I was just thinking, like a lot of these models, like this one, are very complex and often quite easy for users to mess up. How happy are you that this one is sort of protected against people, doing accidents with the mouse and so on?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if you're anything like me, Andrew, I do have a habit of accidentally clicking in the wrong place, but I can happily report this tool has been developed by Beringa, and it does have some security features within it. So the important cells, a lot of the important cells are locked down, and so as long as, well, if you can try and keep your focus on remembering that you should only be putting data within the light yellow cells, you should be fine. Now, have I deliberately tried to break the tool and overwrite formulae? I haven't done that, so that, you know, I think it's important to keep, you know, your wits about you when you're using the tool and not accidentally changing things within some of the formula cells. But I know that Beringa did try and build in some kind of security features into the tool so that people don't accidentally kind of corrupt the tool and end up getting the wrong data from it.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
And yeah, just to add to that, I think, you know, it's no doubt you couldn't get someone walk off the street and use this tool. You do need some expertise in the world of CBA. So yeah, it's you know, it's a good tool, but there won't be thousands of people who are set up to use this sort of thing at the moment. So, but what we're trying to do as a product group is give that support to people out there who are, you know, have a use case for it, but are possibly a little bit daunted, because as Gary's pointed out through that demo, the thing's huge really, but actually you don't have to use a lot of it for your first cut and your first run. So you know, hopefully we're helping people understand that it's not that complex, but data's definitely the challenge in the feedback we've had so far.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, I hold my hand up. I do spend my life staring at CBA spreadsheets, and so, yeah, and I would happily admit that this is, you know, it is quite daunting. When I first looked at it, I thought, wow, there's a lot of tabs here and there's a lot going on. So I can fully understand why people, if they're not, you know, spending their you know, their waking hours staring at spreadsheets, they would find this a difficult nut to crack initially, and so I think Ian's absolutely right. People shouldn't be put off by the fact that they've got to populate 1,000 lines of data. It's not like that at all. If you've only got 2 sets of kind of data that you want to look at, then the tool will cope with that, absolutely. And on that front, we're thinking about, depending on what feedback we get, we might put in some more kind of structured recorded sessions whereby, I mean, today I just kind of worked through a very simple example within the tool. If we think stakeholders are going to get value from it, we might record a session whereby we kind of go one step earlier and we have a blank spreadsheet and we take the user through literally populating each cell with a simple example and showing how you can go from having nothing within the spreadsheet to having a worked example based on a simple set of input data. So, you know, we're very keen to try and, you know, lighten the burden for people to actually get people to start using the tool. So I realize there's going to be that initial inertia and trepidation about using it, but anything that we can do to support that, we are, you know, we're more than willing to try and do something on that front to try and get the ball rolling on it.
Right, there didn't appear to be any more hands or any more questions, but you know, we're very happy to take questions after the event. So we'll share myself and Gary's email address, but there's also the ENA. Helen, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how requests come into ENA, if anyone's got any feedback on this.
Yeah, sure thing. I'll quickly post this on the chat as well, but the email address is just opennetworks@energynetworks.co.uk. So do feel free to email us any questions about the tool, any feedback you have after you've used it, anything at all.
Brilliant. And if there's anyone out there with use cases and they want to make contact with Gary and myself and you know, have a bit of one-on-one support, that's no problem either. We're just very keen we get this out there, get it used, and we start learning from it. Well, I guess that concludes the sort of walkthrough and the demo. So hopefully useful. Please let us have any feedback. Helen, we're going to talk about the Slido.
Yes, if you can quickly pull up that last slide, or I can do that as well. Thank you. Brilliant. So yeah, if you want to head to slido.com and join with the code ONWSCBA, we do have 3-4 questions there for you just to kind of gauge how helpful you found this session in helping you use the CBA tool, how likely you are to use it, if you have any comments or feedback to us on the session. So would be very grateful if you have a moment to fill that out, and it will be open after the session as well. So if you have a second later, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, a lot of time and effort has been put in by people to kind of develop the tool, and we're now at that phase where we're really looking for feedback from people in terms of how we can kind of get the tool to be used. So any feedback that you can provide or any ideas, suggestions you've got would be very gratefully received.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I guess we've come to the end of that. And like we say, if we get any, we'll share our email addresses, and you've got the ENA inbox, and yeah, we'll respond to anything we get. And if anyone is particularly interested, please make contact with myself and Gary, and we'll work out how we can support each other in building up some CBAs. So I guess it's thanks all for your time today. Please give us some feedback. Let us know if it was useful or not. And I think we'll call it a day there.
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Helen.
Cheers, everybody.